Before you listen, if you enjoy the stories and want to hear more, then please consider subscribing. Most of you listening aren't subscribed, so please take this time to subscribe. Turn on notifications so you'll never miss a story and be the first to hear. You'll also be supporting me. Thank you. I'll never forget the total sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach when that used laptop I scored on eBay for an unbelievably cheap price turned out to be nothing but a box stuffed with plain old rocks when it finally arrived. When I thought the time was an incredible stroke of luck, finding a top-of-the-line laptop for a super low bargain basement price quickly revealed itself to be just another scam by some jerk out to make a quick buck off tricking deal seekers like myself. It all started one bored night a couple months ago when I was just aimlessly browsing eBay, killing time looking at electronics for sale. As a pretty broke college student, I was in dire need of a serious laptop upgrade for tackling my growing pile of homework and projects, but I definitely didn't have the cash to splash on the latest fancy model. After clicking around a while, I came across a listing that made my eyes pop. It was for what looked to be a barely used, loaded MacBook Pro being sold for a tiny fraction of what those things usually go for retail. I'm talking hundreds less. The seller claimed it was gently used, fully functional, yada yada. Of course, the skeptical, too good to be true alarm started blaring in my head immediately. No way would someone give up a machine like that for peanuts unless it was either a fake knockoff, stolen, or had some serious issues wrong under the hood that they forgot to mention. But I still couldn't help gawking longingly at those awesome specs and crystal clear photos in the listing, imagining how much easier it would make cranking through the endless research papers and lab reports I had piling up. And to top it off, the seller actually had overwhelmingly positive feedback going back years, with no negative reviews or sketchy vibes popping off their history at all. After debating it for probably way too long, I finally said screw it, closed my eyes, and put in a bid of $200 bucks, which sounded fair for a used model. I was positive there was no way I'd actually win the auction when it ended in a few days. Figured no harm dreaming for a bit. But lo and behold, some miracle occurred. I ended up being the winning bidder when the little timer ran out. Just barely beat a couple other people who must have also gotten duped by the crazy low price like me. I was pumped beyond belief, but also had this nervous pit in my gut. I mean, come on, a laptop worth well north of $800 normally, and I had snagged it for only $200. Seemed way too good to be true, but the seller reassured me it was legit, just an unwanted gift they were trying to quickly unload. Against my better judgment, I swallowed the flimsy explanation and eagerly completed the sale. The days I waited for it to ship and eventually arrive stretched out forever. I kept zoning out in class, imagining how much easier cranking through homework and projects would be with this bad boy computing powerhouse at my fingertips. After getting my hopes way up, it kind of started to feel like fate had stepped in and sent me a little surprise miracle right when I needed it most. You can imagine how psyched I was when I got home from class one day to find the package waiting on my scraggly porch. I grabbed it and sprinted up to my room with blood pumping, hands trembling. I tore the box open like a starved animal, filtering through all the packing filler until I finally unearthed a standard black laptop case buried inside. But when I unzipped it hopefully, my heart just sank down into my stomach like an anchor. Inside was nothing except a pile of plain old rocks that had been neatly stacked and arranged to roughly mimic the shape and weight of an actual laptop. It slowly dawned on me that I was just the latest sucker to fall for what was clearly an elaborate scam used to dupe deal-seeking schmucks like me into wiring over money without seeing the goods first. I felt like such an oblivious chump realizing the listing itself, the seller's too good to be true feedback, all those polite email exchanges. Everything had obviously been completely fabricated just to make it convincingly legit. All to reel in the wishful thinkers willing to ignore the blazing warning signs just to save a few bucks. I might as well have sent my cash directly to a Nigerian prince. Of course, by the time I angrily logged back into eBay that night to try reporting the fraud, the bogus seller's profile had already been deleted entirely, along with the original listing. Multiple attempts to email the address they had used bounced right back undeliverable. Long story short, they disappeared like ghosts into the vast abyss of internet scams with my 200 hard-earned dollars in hand. eBay basically said they'd look into it, but couldn't guarantee any kind of reimbursement. A brutally expensive lesson about being less gullible, that's for sure. For a couple weeks afterward, I was downright depressed about it. Just felt so unbelievably stupid for letting some random scammer take advantage of me like that. The money loss stung pretty bad on its own. But what really ate me up inside was having that fleeting taste of hope dangled before me, only to have it ripped away by a bunch of stupid rocks. I had already started dreaming up all the new opportunities a powerful new computer would open up for me. So to instead have my tight budget and blind trust repaid with a slap in the face just felt extra cruel, like the thief was mocking my ambitions from afar. Eventually, I managed to trade some video games and save up enough cash again to just buy a basic used model off Craigslist. But even now, every time I sit down to grind through an essay at my rickety desk, that whole scam experience still leaves a bitter aftertaste, tainting the satisfaction of finally having my own bottom-tier laptop. If nothing else, it definitely opened my eyes in a hurry to all the predators and opportunists lurking in the shadows behind even the most innocent-looking online listings, ready to exploit excitement and desperation. I learned the hard way that sometimes an unbelievable deal really is too good to be true, simply because deceit is baking underneath. And you know what? Those dang rocks are still sitting right on my desk today as a little memento. Instead of eroding my determination, though, they actually remind me to stay strong in the face of jerks trying to deceitfully block my path upward. Next time I start daydreaming and let my guard down, they'll be there to snap me back to reality. While scammers keep trying to nibble away and distract, my eyes stay fixed steady as stone on the horizon ahead. My goals aren't swayed by tricks or illusions, only honest effort. With my daughter's 8th birthday coming up, I'd been searching online for something extra unique and meaningful to surprise her with this year. While browsing eBay late one night, I came across a listing for a beautiful antique Victorian-style dollhouse being sold for a low buy now priced by an estate liquidator. Even in the photos, I could see the immaculate craftsmanship and ornate detailing that had been carved into the woodwork. It looked like an absolute work of art that would become the perfect centerpiece for my daughter's extensive collection of dolls and other toys. Without thinking twice, I quickly placed the order and won the auction. Then I eagerly awaited its delivery, already picturing my little girl's thrilled face lighting up when she saw this incredible vintage dollhouse for the first time on her special day. A few days later, an enormous heavy box arrived on our doorstep, containing what appeared on the surface to be the exact intricate antique dollhouse from the eBay listing. I cautiously unpacked the entire thing and was truly amazed by the sheer level of ornate detail that had been painstakingly etched into each of the miniature rooms. Given its pristine condition, despite clearly being an antique, it truly seemed like an unbelievable bargain find for the very modest auction price I had ended up paying the estate seller. But then when I opened the final styrofoam compartment meant to hold the family of antique wooden dolls that had been described in the listing to accompany the house itself, I felt the first palpable chill of dread settle over me. Because something about this matching set of posable wooden dolls seemed subtly yet distinctly sinister. Their tiny carved faces had eerily lifelike expressions that shifted if you stared too long. Their hand-painted eyes appeared to follow you around the room. Most spine-tingling of all were the rough, rusty metal pins that protruded from the dolls' heads, hands, feet, and chests at odd angles, almost like cursed voodoo figurines. I shook off my illogical sense of building unease, scolding myself for being overly superstitious. This was surely just some harmless set of quaint antique toys modeled simply after the common motifs and aesthetics of the era. Nothing more nefarious than that. My vivid writer's imagination was surely just getting carried away after late-night eBay browsing. My daughter was going to be absolutely delighted by it all regardless. So I carefully repacked the dollhouse and its inhabitants away to gift to my little girl at her birthday party that coming weekend. And initially, seeing the sheer joy and awe light up my daughter's face when she unwrapped the vintage doll playset seemed to confirm I had made the perfect choice. For several hours at her party, she became completely engrossed in unpacking each room, arranging the antique furniture pieces inside just so, and making up elaborate stories about the unusual wooden doll family to act out with her friends. Just as I had hoped, she didn't seem to notice or be bothered whatsoever by the doll's admittedly unsettling appearances. My heart swelled seeing her so enthralled by this unique new treasure. But later that same night, my earlier misdoings came flooding back tenfold when I peered into my daughter's bedroom to check on her before turning in myself. There she lay peacefully fast asleep in bed, cuddling one of the hand-painted porcelain dolls from the set that she had already clearly grown attached to. As I bent down gently trying to pry the figure from her arms to properly tuck her in for the night, my daughter's sleeping face suddenly contorted into an ugly sneer totally foreign on her normally angelic features. Mine, she snarled forcefully at me in a guttural, inhuman voice before rolling back over and returning to a restful slumber, leaving me stunned and shaken to the core over what had just transpired. Over the following weeks, my daughter's attachment to her new doll family seemed to gradually transform into something bordering on unhealthily obsessed. She would spend hours alone in her room muttering unintelligibly under her breath as she handled the dolls, staring ahead blankly with glazed eyes as if hypnotized. Anytime I gently suggested maybe spending time with her actual human friends or playing with some of her other untouched toys, she would fly into a hysterical tantrum, clinging to the antique dolls with a disturbing ferocity blazing behind her normally soft eyes. Around the house, increasingly sinister disturbances and unexplained phenomena began to plague my husband and I, all centered around my daughter's room and the dollhouse within. Furniture would be found mysteriously overturned in the mornings when no one had been home. Elaborate strange symbols would appear carved into walls and floorboards overnight, only to have mysteriously vanished without a trace days later. Most chilling were the occasions I would wait to find my mirror or windowsill marked by vile, unsettling messages scrawled across the glass in still dripping blood-red wax. Throughout it all, my daughter would remain curiously unaffected, detached, and almost oblivious whenever I frantically pointed out each new unnatural occurrence around us. It was as if she were mentally checked out, lost in some fantasy realm with her beloved dolls, as a once cheery home decayed around her. The breaking point came unexpectedly one evening when I had overheard my daughter through the open window speaking in garbled tongues out in the backyard. I ran outside to find her manically digging shallow holes as she chanted, "Blood makes the vines grow." They must feed, to herself over and over. As I got closer, choking back horror, I saw she was attempting to ritualistically bury her favorite doll family outside under the moonlight. When I finally composed myself enough to reach for the figure still laying beside her in the dirt, attempting to put an end to this madness, my daughter let out an inhuman snarl, and her eyes flashed a chilling crimson in the low light. Vines covered in sharp thorns suddenly burst forth from underneath the partially buried doll bundles, rapidly encasing them in a protective cocoon before my unbelieving eyes. I could feel a palpable dark energy pulsating from the cocoon, feeding on the blood and fear in the air. In that terrifying moment, it felt as if a blindfold had been torn away, and I was seeing the true nature of these toys for the first time. Exposed before me was something ancient, something evil that had been festering and growing in power, poised to consume my daughter's soul if left unchecked any longer. I knew then that I could not undo the past mistake of ever bringing this cursed dollhouse into our lives, but I still had to try whatever was necessary to rescue my little girl from its demonic grip. Ignoring her pained screams of protest, I built a roaring bonfire in the backyard and, one by one, hurled the antique dollhouse and all its inhabitants into the raging flames, purging their wickedness until nothing remained but smoldering ashes. I'll never forget the profoundly unsettling feeling I got when a video game I bought for cheap on eBay turned out to be something much more twisted and sinister. What I thought would just be a fun, mindless way to pass free time quickly morphed into a deeply disturbing glimpse into a very dark underworld that I truly wish I could somehow unsee. It all started out innocently enough one lazy Sunday afternoon as I was browsing eBay looking for any good deals on used video games. As a cash-strapped college student, I had to stick to an extremely tight budget for any entertainment or recreations. By chance, I happened upon a newly released big-name game being auctioned off at only a fraction of its usual $60 retail price. At first, I was extremely skeptical, certain it had to be some kind of scam or counterfeit copy. But the seller apparently had overwhelmingly positive feedback from hundreds of other sales. After contemplating it skeptically for a few more minutes, I finally placed a modest bid, and to my surprise and delight, I ended up winning the auction at only $15 total. According to the listing, the game was unboxed but completely unused with all original packaging and discs intact. Even if by some chance it didn't work properly, I figured at worst I was only out $15 and could probably get my money back by filing a complaint through eBay if it came to that. It just seemed worth the risk for a chance to score such a hot new release so cheaply. I eagerly awaited its arrival, imagining how much fun my friends would have playing the most popular new game together once it got here. A few days later, a standard brown cardboard box arrived on my doorstep containing what appeared on the surface to be the official case for the highly anticipated video game I had won. I excitedly tore open the package right there in the hallway, but my heart sank immediately when I realized the case was completely empty inside except for a single blank silver disc, not the glossy graphics and elaborate game details I had expected. Still clinging to a thread of hope, I popped the mysterious disc into my PlayStation console and waited, just praying that maybe it was somehow still a factory defect, bad burn, or scratched disc, and the actual software was still on there intact and playable. But instead, I only got an immediate error message on screen that the console could not properly read the disc at all. My heart dropped as the reality set in that I had been totally scammed out of $15 on some completely worthless fake knockoff copy. Angrily, I next tried inserting the puzzling disc into my laptop instead, just on the tiny off chance that it had some corrupted or fragmented data files that could potentially still be extracted or recovered. But again, my laptop only froze on the loading screen momentarily before unexpectedly booting up a generic video player program with a grainy black and white film already queued up and ready to play. Now, more puzzled than ever, I sat and watched the grainy footage of figures dressed in long, dark robes ominously chanting and marching in intricate patterns around a raging bonfire in the dead of night. Haunting. Discordant violent shrieks and otherworldly echoing chants played over the top, making the hair on my arms stand up. Growing increasingly uneasy, I skipped ahead to a random spot, hoping in vain it was just some horror movie I didn't recognize. But the scene that came up next was even more disturbing, showing a group of similarly robed figures gathered in a tight circle, almost pulsating together as they slowly passed around a jeweled goblet and small locked box amongst themselves before eventually collapsing one by one onto the ground. I reluctantly continued skipping through, morbidly curious, but with a knot of dread twisting tighter in my stomach each minute. The further I got, the more sinister and depraved the rituals being depicted became. One clip showed figures in robes rhythmically gyrating and convulsing around a nude woman tied to a post, chanting as thick smoke rose up, obscuring her. Another showed a completely different group hovering with glinting knives over a nearly naked man who was tied tightly to a stone table, as they seemed to methodically yet unhurriedly draw strange glowing symbols across his writhing body using thick, dripping candles. By this point beyond disturbed, I finally forced myself to pause the horrific slideshow, take a deep breath, and try approaching this rationally. I carefully examined the disc itself again, hoping for any identifying marks or etching around the edges. But both sides were glossy silver and totally smooth, just a standard homemade CDR. The plastic case and paper insert it arrived in were also unnervingly blank, except for a title scrawled in black marker. No other design, logos, or identifying info that would indicate this was some morbid underground film I could look up and make sense of. What I was left staring down at appeared to be someone's personal handcrafted video compilation burned onto a disc, then deceitfully packaged and marketed as a popular video game to trick unsuspecting buyers who were expecting normal commercial merchandise to arrive, not this freakish underground content. The chilling implications slowly sank in that whoever had orchestrated this elaborate bait and switch scam had deliberately wanted random people like me to see this for some twisted reason I could not begin to fathom. The more I thought about the situation, the more I realized I had apparently stumbled onto something very intentionally crafted to manipulate and subtly indoctrinate the viewer through deception, confusion, and facing their fear of the unknown. Why else would someone go to such elaborate lengths to disguise these ritually violent and deranged recordings and display them out of context framed as normal entertainment? I shuddered imagining a more suggestible mind than my own being effortlessly molded by whatever messages were embedded into these horrific scenes, all without their conscious awareness. The power of that planted influence seemed unpredictable and dangerous. I knew immediately I had to get this disc as far out of my possession as possible before I accidentally viewed any more that could potentially warp my psyche in ways I couldn't anticipate. This was not some movie to casually watch out of curiosity. The intentions of those behind it clearly went beyond just shock value. The next morning, I bagged the disc in a Ziploc and brought it to the local police department along with all the purchase and listing details from eBay, hoping they might be able to work backwards to trace the producers and bring them to justice, or at least shut this operation down. but frustratingly, the board officer who took my statement seemed skeptical that any actual crime had even been committed based on what I described. He chalked it up more to warped kids playing some dumb prank for attention, or at worst a couple harmless goth types trying to scare strangers. Thanks for listening in. If you like these stories and want to hear more, then please subscribe and like and support this new channel. We have more stories for you to listen to.